Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Shavi. I'm the host for the PM Learning Series and a product manager at LinkedIn. Please know that our events get so popular that we're receiving spammy requests for people to join another link to join the event. So please don't be fooled by spams, and our trust and support team will help us report and monitor some of those chats. So for those who are tuning in today, thank you so much. Please introduce yourself and drop in the chat where you're joining us from. So this is part of LinkedIn Learning's product management learning series. Welcome back. We've been stopped for 2 weeks, and so very excited to see many of you rejoining. So this is a series of live streaming events where industry thought leaders and product practitioners share about their career journey and lessons learned, best practice to inspire current and aspiring PM like you to level up your product career. So make sure you subscribe to our newsletter, links in the event description to receive a recap and replay of this event, as well as updates about future events. So today with me, we have a very, very special guest, Dan Olsen, who's one of my favorite authors of one of the classic PM books, the bestseller Lean Product Playbook. Dan is a product management trainee, consultant, and author. He's worked with a lot of some of the most reputable tech companies to help them build products that customers love. So his clients include Google, Facebook, Uber, Amazon, Fox, and Walmart. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dan.
Shavi, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Let's see. Folks are still joining in. Please introduce yourself in the chat and drop in the chat what questions you have for Dan. All right. Dan, let's start with maybe talking a little bit about your career journey. How did you get started in product, and what led you to writing the Lean Product Playbook?
Yeah. So, the story of my kind of career probably starts when I was a kid. My parents got me a computer at the age of like 9 or 10. And so I was very comfortable. I mean, I mainly used it to play games back in the day, but I learned how to code on it. And so I was very comfortable with computers. And then I was an electrical engineering major, so I continued kind of that technical background. My first job was actually designing nuclear submarines for the Navy, which was a really, really cool job. It's kind of like NASA for submarines. It's very similar to NASA. And I actually honestly learned a lot of fundamentals of good product development, product management there, even though my title was engineer. Everybody was an engineer, and then after doing that for 5 years, I knew I wanted to go to business school and get more into the civilian world and software stuff, hopefully, or tech. I didn't really know, but tech. And so that's what brought me out here to Silicon Valley, where I've been living ever since I went to business school at Stanford. You're in business school trying to figure out what am I going to do after graduation, learning about all these different careers. And I heard about this up and coming career, emerging career called product management. And the more I learned about it, the more I was like, that sounds like a perfect fit. You're not actually coding, but you're working with the developers and you're talking to customers. And I asked, because I never done it, I asked everybody, hey, where's the best place to learn product management? And at the time, pretty much everybody said Intuit was the best place to learn. And it was. I was fortunate to get a job there. I walked into basically like a product management, marketing, product development machine that had been operating for years. And so I was just a sponge and learned a lot there. After working there for a while, I wanted to apply what I learned at startups. And so I went and was a head of product at a few startups. I also co-founded a startup of my own. And then I kind of got into being a consultant, like an interim VP of product for startups, which was a lot of fun. So I did that for like Box back in 2007 and done it for some other companies, and then kind of transitioned to being an advisor. And then I got into speaking early on too. Like in 2006, I started speaking and sharing best practices. And then that led to my book, the Lean Product Playbook, which came out. And since the book came out, my work has kind of transitioned more to doing training workshops, or events like this, where we're talking about best practices, whether it's public speaking or private workshops or public workshops for companies. So it's a mix today. I also run a meetup, which has over 11,000 people, Lean Product Meetup. So I love what we're doing here today. I'm a big believer in building community and sharing best practices. PM has just exploded in the last 5 to 6 years, right? And so it's just nice to see that there are more and more resources for the product community these days.
Yeah, absolutely. Towards the end of the chat, we can share more about your product community and upcoming events.
Sure.
I really love your experience, coaching a lot of startups and working in startups as well. It will be so valuable for us as we touching upon some of the Lean Product Playbook concept. I also really like you're being a pioneer in the field, right? Like you said, like product management have really started to boomerang, in the past 5 or 6 years. And your book
Yeah.
came out, I think, roughly around at the start of that trying to contribute to the growth of the profession. So I would love to hear more from you. Let's start with the basics.
Sure.
Let's just touch up, cover the basics of what is Lean Product Process. Obviously, you have a lot of experience working with
Sure.
startups. So I think the first challenge or the first step is how to achieve product market fit.
Yeah.
When you have an idea, how do you turn an idea into something that will be valuable for the market? So maybe can you walk us through the process? And if you have some example to share,
Sure.
that would bring the concept to life.
Sure, definitely. Yeah. And I guess I didn't answer one part of your question, which is like, well, how did I write the book or why did I write the book? Basically, I kind of learned best practices into it. And then I kind of built my own at startups. And it was actually kind of emerged from consulting and speaking. I was interacting with so many product teams and seeing the questions that they were asking and working with so many different companies, seeing what worked here, what didn't work here. And I remember one day I had a very inquisitive workshop class and they wanted like very specific guidance. And what do you do next? And what's the next step? And what's the next step? And so then I remember doing it on the whiteboard, like, okay, well, first you do this long process. And so the book is really just kind of like trying to share and document the best practices that I had learned and created at that point in time. So, yes, it applies to startups, but also it applies to big companies. Anybody who's trying to create some new product initiative, anything. It's called the Lean Product Playbook and the Lean Product Process, Product Market Fit Pyramid. But as I like to point out, like if you're working on a feature, it applies at that level too. So everything I'm about to say applies if you're building a brand new product, it obviously applies, but it also applies if you're building an individual feature, right? And so let me share my screen real quick, and I'll share the key framework. Is basically the product market fit pyramid. Okay, and so y'all should be able to see this now. Hopefully, yeah, there it is. Cool. And it's funny because Mark Andreessen coined the term product market fit in a blog post that he wrote in 2007. So Andreessen, who's a famous venture capitalist now, but started his career, building the first browser that led to Netscape, basically, right? And he kind of just said, hey, you kind of know it when you have it. Your servers are melting down. Everybody wants what you've got. But it wasn't really there wasn't a rigorous description. And then it became popular with Lean Startup. But again, there wasn't a rigorous definition. And being an engineer, I'm kind of a rigorous guy at heart. I like to have solid kind of principles. So I basically built this product market fit pyramid that has 5 layers. And the way to think about it is each of these layers is one of the key hypotheses that you need to get right enough in order to achieve product market fit. And it all starts, the reason it's a pyramid, some people ask me, why is it a pyramid? Is because each layer needs to build on the layers beneath it, right? You can look at this as an interblocked set of assumptions. So the first is, who's the target customer? Everything starts with that. Who are we trying to create value for, right? Whether it's the economic buyer, whether it's the end user, whether it's internal user. I use customer in the broadest sense. Who are we trying to create customer value for? The next layer up is, for that customer, what are their needs? And there's a big thing we may touch on about whole problem space versus solution space. I was thinking about this before the call and just realizing how everyone's default way of thinking is to think of solutions. Most of the conversations you're having with your product teams are, oh, should we build this feature or that? Should we build the feature this way or that way? I think it should be a drop down. I think it should be a pop-up. Those are all solution space. So you want to get really grounded in, well, what's the customer need or problem or benefit that we're trying to solve? And then secondly, there's this whole thing of, well, which ones are underserved or unmet needs, underserved needs, as opposed to the ones that are well served, right? This is a way for us to prioritize how big of an opportunity is each of these customer needs. And taken together, these 2 layers form the market, right? And if you look in an economics or marketing textbook, it'll say the definition of a market is a group of people that share a set of common needs. And you don't actually control the market in the sense that they make their decision about which product to use or purchase. You can pick who you're going to target. What you get to control are these 3 product layer hypotheses. The first one here is value proposition, right? In an ideal world, this is tightly coupled with the underserved needs layer, but we don't know if it is. So usually I show it as a gap at first, right? I'm like, okay, we don't know. So there's like a gap here like this, basically, right? But basically value proposition is what needs are we actually going to promise to customers that our product delivers, and how are we going to do so in a way that's unique and different, right? This is where product strategy lives and differentiation comes in. How are you going to be better, right? And that's where I like to apply the Kano model, which I learned actually before I moved out here. I got a master's in industrial engineering, where I learned about all those good lean concepts and quality concepts. Next up is your feature set. Right? This is your functionality. What functionality should be in the product or feature? And the way to think about this is customers use your features to enjoy the benefits that are in your value prop. And then the final layer is user experience, right? And users interact with your user experience to use the features to get the benefits in your value prop, right? And product market fit is just, okay, we are going after this market with these set of assumptions or execution. How well does, what we're building or creating resonating with the market? And then once I did that, I realized, hey, I can create a process to guide people through forming these hypotheses and testing them. And that's a lean product process, which is why I switched to this slide, where all you do is you start at the bottom and you work your way up. Step one, who do we think our customer are? And this is not meant to be like in-depth long-term research project, just documenting in bullet points. What are our assumptions or hypotheses about who the customer is? What do we think their underserved needs are? What should our value prop be? What should our feature set be? And this is where MVP, I forgot to mention, this is where the idea of MVP comes in, which we'll probably talk about, where you don't want to overscope your feature set until you confirm you're going in the right direction. And then UX. And then the process just has one final step, which is once we have that UX, whether it's a live product, like an alpha or something, or it's a prototype. And by the way, I'm a huge fan of using prototypes to validate your ideas before you do any coding or building. Then we take that prototype and we go, or live product, and we show it to customers to close loop and see where we're at with product market fit. So that's a lean product process. It's meant to be iterative. So real quick, you're going to go through this loop of forming hypotheses, designing ways to test those hypotheses, testing them, and learning, right? So that's the introduction, a quick overview of the lean product process.
No, that's awesome. Thanks for the overview. Let's go into some of the pieces, right? Let's start with defining problem space and solution space. I think so much so is like, as PMs or anyone who's the owner of an idea, we tend to naturally fall in love with our idea, right? We're thinking that it's so genius. So what are some common pitfalls, for product development teams that maybe we should be more aware, such that we can delineate, operating in the problem space versus the solution space?
Sure. And for people that don't be familiar with it, I want to just define it real quick. And the basic takeaway is it's kind of this learned awareness, right? It's like, we live in solution space, as I like to, point out. We live in solution space. So it's natural, right, to think of features and solutions, right? But in contrast, problem space is when we kind of separate the solution from, hey, what's the problem or customer need that we're trying to address here? Right. And a lot of people know the user story template. Hey, as a blank type of user, I want to be able to do blank so I can do blank, right? That's so I can is the essence. Like, why would someone care about it? Okay, yeah, you want to build feature X. That's in the solution space, right? Anything that's a specific implementation or feature, or even a design that's intended to address a customer need, is in the solution space, right? So the example I like to give is, let's say I thought, it's too hard to share photos with your friends. So, last week I launched a new app on the iPhone store that makes it easy to share photos with your friends. The app I just launched would be in the solution space, but that statement, hey, I want to make it easier to share photos with your friends, that's a problem space statement, right? And if you think about it, I could say that without actually any solution in mind yet, right? Maybe I'm going to do carrier pigeons or do some crazy service. I don't know. We haven't talked about it yet, right? So that's the idea. And again, the reason that I bring this up is far too often people jump to solution space because that's the biased, natural way of thinking, and on a product team, it makes sense. Like developers, what do they have to do? They have to ship working code in the solution space. So they are firmly in the solution space. Designers have to design mockups, right? And UIs that are in the solution space, right? So those roles are naturally in the solution space. So what I like to do is say, well, whose job is it on the team to really make sure the team is thinking about problem space? It falls to the product manager. That's one of your main value adds as a product manager, to say, hey, let's make sure we understand the problems before we go off and build these features. Are we really clear that this is a real customer problem? Is it an important problem? Let's get clarity on it, because far too often it becomes like a ready, fire, aim situation where it's like you get all excited and you spec a bunch of features and you build it. And, there are stats out there that 80 or 90% of new products fail. This is one of the core reasons, in my opinion, why, is because we never were clear that it was a problem. We never validated that it was a problem. So as I like to say, developers develop, designers design, PMs, what would the one-word job description be for us? It'd be defining who's our customer and what are their problems that we're going to solve.
That's awesome. Thanks for the delineation.
Sure.
Now let's talk about, the first step in the pyramid, was about target customer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what brings product from good to great is able to identify those underserved needs accurately,
Right.
not just what's on the surface, right?
Right.
But I find it sometimes really hard to do because customer will tell you something, but we all know that they're not really good at articulating what they truly want. They'll tell you they
Sure.
want a faster horse. They will never tell you they want a car because
Sure.
they're not able to imagine that, right? So,
Right.
what frameworks do you have to identify kind of
Sure.
those underserved customer needs?
Sure. Yeah. And um, I'm glad you brought up the Henry Ford quote, and because every once in a while that quote gets brought up, or some kind of they'll say, "Look at Apple; they don't really do customer research, so customers don't know what you got until you show it to them," or kind of thing, right? And that I think that those quotes get misused a lot. And the essence of why is this slide I have sharing with you right now, right? It's not fair to expect consumers to imagine and foresee the next disruptive innovation of technology. Yeah, I want a car. Like, why would they're not technologists, they're not designers, right? And so, yes, they may ask for a faster horse, but your job as a PM is to say a horse is a solution. What's the problem that they're trying to solve with a horse? Well, it's transportation from point A to point B. And guess what? If a horse is, 10 miles an hour and you can come up with some solution that's 20 miles an hour, of course they're going to prefer that, right? Because if you talk to customers like, hey, faster is better, saving me time is better, right? So that's the thing, especially Apple, they don't get everything right, but they have a really good track record. I think it's because they really understand customer needs and they understand what technology can do. And there are several Steve Jobs quotes where he's very clear about you need to focus on customers and problems first. Obviously, they're really good technologists too. The other point is really important, as you said. I like to use the metaphor of peeling the onion. You've got to get deep in who really is our customer and what are their needs. And so the reason this metaphor comes up is usually the first couple thoughts or ideas you have, that's like the outer skin or outer layer of the onion. And it's okay to start there. But if you think about most products that have been really successful, it's because they peeled the onion, got really clear on who's our customer. Who are they? Like, a lot of times I'll get a high level answer in my workshops. Be like, yeah, our products for call reps, call support call reps. Okay, I'm like, okay, but they're not all the same. Which call reps are going to more want this versus less want this, right? I did a project once where I was helping a team, and they're like, our target market is millennials. And this is what happens in our world. A lot of times you get the specific answer. It sounds specific, like, okay, millennials, cool. Then I stopped and scratched my head. I'm like, well, how many millennials are there in the world? And so we added 2 other segmentation attributes to peel, what I call peel the onion on that, right? And get more specific about it, right? And in other talks, I won't get into, in other talks I share, how do you do market segmentation? But I think the other thing you're getting at is, okay, once we're clear on our market and once we've identified the problem space, and I'll just flash up a quick problem space definition so people understand. This is what I call a problem space definition. It's not complicated. It's like you kind of create a cleaned up list of what I call atomic benefits are, right? And then you just organize them by some kind of, what the overarching benefit is, right? And that's the thing. We call these benefit ladders. So this is an example of a problem space definition. And I would argue if you're the PM for your feature or product, you should be kind of trying to create this and improving this over time and making sure your team's clear on it. And the funny thing, this is for I didn't mention, this is for TurboTax, by the way, right? The funny thing is when you have a really good problem space definition, almost any solution idea that the team thinks of, you can map back and say, oh, that's just another way to save people time on their taxes. Oh, that's just another way to save people money. Oh, that's just another way to make people feel more confident, right? So once you get to that level, it's kind of empowering, like, oh my gosh, like everything we do. And every once in a while, you'll add a new fundamental benefit to your value prop, which is an exciting time. But then once you've done that, the question becomes, okay, how do we prioritize these? And that's where, I share the idea of importance versus satisfaction, right? Basically. And, quickly, let me find a slide here. Basically, I'll go through the 4 quadrants real quick. The importance is for the user need. We're talking about how important is it to the target customer. Everything's a function of target customer. If I ask this type of customer, they may say it's low importance to save time on their taxes. If I ask this other customer, they say it's high importance. And then on the horizontal axis is, okay, how satisfied, however they're getting that need met today with whatever solution or product, how satisfied are they, right? And so you end up with just low, high, and we can just talk about the quadrants. The bottom 2 quadrants, regardless of satisfaction, they're not worth going after because they're low importance user need, right? The way you deliver customer value and achieve product market fit is to address a need that's high importance. So nobody does this on purpose, of course, but what does it mean if somebody ends up in these quadrants? It means they thought it was important to customers, but they didn't go out and do the product discovery research to validate that, right? So that's the idea. The next quadrant is this upper right quadrant. So this is high importance of user needs. So that's better, but it's also high satisfaction. So yes, it's important, but most people are happy with how they're getting it met today. That's what I call a competitive market, right? The example I always think of there is Google Internet Search. If I ask people, what need does it solve for you? Well, it helps me find what I'm looking for, the information I'm looking for online. If I ask people how important is that, they say it's pretty important, except for those midnight YouTube searches. It's pretty important usually to find what you're looking for. But if I ask people, hey, how well is it working for you on a scale of 1 to 10? Most people would probably say like 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10. Like usually you find what you're looking for, right? And so I'm not saying you shouldn't enter a competitive market, but that you hear people say you need to be 10x better. That's where you need to be 10x better. And then the final quadrant is this upper left quadrant. Here you've got high importance of user need and low satisfaction. That's where opportunities lie, because people are telling you this is an important need, and I do not yet have a solution that's really satisfying me here. Now, these opportunities don't live forever, but by doing this kind of analysis, you can find windows of opportunity where you can address these, right? And I would say, if nothing else, if you want to increase the odds of success of your future product, just take the what you do basically is you take the benefits from this problem space, you put each one on a sticky note, and with your team, you just say, okay, where do we think these go? And what you want to do is focus on the things that are the closest to that upper left corner. Basically, one thing that's not in the book is this heat map, which I actually kind of quantified a visualization. But it shows you the opportunity score. As you can see, the closer you are to this corner, the better it is. So that, that's the quantitative version. The qualitative version is just, hey, just put it up here and try to avoid these quadrants in this quadrant and try to find one or more problems that you can solve up here that will significantly increase your odds of success.
I love that heat map. I think it answers our members' question. Yes, there are benefits that are not worth, solving because they're not important enough. And you want to make sure you're solving the most important problems.
Or likewise, someone can be fully satisfied, like Google Internet Search. It's an important problem, but there's a great solution out there, right? And it's funny because in the book, there was a startup back in 2008 or so that tried to overtake Google, and I mentioned them in the book. It's like you can't just come out with a Me Too search engine. You can't just come out with a Me Too product. So there's two reasons you wouldn't do that. One is low importance, like you said, Chi, and the other one is, hey, people are really happy with this, and we don't have a good answer. That's where the value prop comes in. We don't have a good answer how we're going to be 10x better. So, Yeah.
I love to talk about value prop next. But before we go there, I just want to say that your point around pulling the onions really resonate with our members, Carlos, getting deeper and deeper to understand the customer needs. Now, let's talk about defining the value prop as we understand how important it is. What would you say are some of the best practices to help customer understand the differentiation that your product bring to the market?
Yeah, happy to do that. And then the interesting thing is, this is where you say, okay, we brainstorm all these benefits. What's our plan for how we're going to actually be better than these other people, right? That's basically the key idea. So let me pull up my slides real quick on that one. And, and so this is where, if you want to answer the question, how are we going to be better or different? This is where really, this is where I like to apply the Kano model, basically, right? That I learned out of a software product management context, but it's a great way to think about it. So just bear with me. I'll explain the Kano model real quick, and then I'll show you how you use it, basically, right? So Professor Kano was from Japan. And it was like the whole 80s kind of, lean manufacturing car movement. It was a way to think about how do we make sure our product is meeting people's needs and achieving high quality. And so what I love about it, it also talks about customer needs. It's grounded in needs, not solutions. And on the x-axis is, okay, for whatever need we're talking about, how fully does the product meet the need? From not at all, you can think 0% met, all the way to 100% met, right? And then the next axis is just, okay, as a function of how well the product meets the need, how much user satisfaction is created or results from that, or dissatisfaction. People can be happy, or they can be unhappy, right? Now, if this seems kind of complicated, the cool thing about the Kano model is there's only 3 relevant categories. It's really a kind of a way to categorize the different needs you're talking about. The first category, and the easiest to kind of get your head around, is a performance benefit or feature. The way to read this graph is going left to right is, hey, as the product meets the need more and more, it's going to create more and more customer satisfaction. Or conversely, as the product meets the need less and less, it's going to create less satisfaction. So more is better, less is worse. If we were in the microprocessor chip business, and everybody else's microprocessors had like a 1 gigahertz clock speed, and we were able to have a 2 gigahertz clock speed, we'd be outperforming by 1 gigahertz. That's like performance you can usually quantify in numbers, right? And this is where most of the competitive action happens, right? Hey, we're 10% better, we're 20% better, we're 30% faster, we're 15% cheaper. All those are performance benefits, right? I also like to use the example of a car. Say I was shopping for a car, 2 cars, they're all identical. Everything's identical, price, all the features, all the specs, except one had twice the miles per gallon as the other one. You're going to pick that one, right? The next one is a must-have. This has a different profile. So the way to read this one is, let's start at the right. Let's assume for a sec the problem fully meets the must-have need. It doesn't actually make anybody happy. The reason by being down here, it's saying we're not getting into the positive satisfaction area, but we're eliminating negative dissatisfaction, right? The way to read this is as you go to the left, it's like, well, but as the product fails to fully meet that must-have, it creates increasing customer dissatisfaction, right? So that's the thing about a must-have. And must-have, I'll acknowledge, is a term that gets thrown around very loosely, especially by hippos and key stakeholders. We must have this feature, but this is the Kano model definition. Like specifically, if like your customer, if your product doesn't have it, customers gonna be like, you're dead in the water. A good example of this would be HIPAA in healthcare. Like if you don't have HIPAA, you're not going to comply with regulatory requirements. So you're just kind of dead in the water. But if you have HIPAA, people go, oh my gosh, your SaaS product has HIPAA? Yeah, I'm so excited. It's like you just need HIPAA, right? Compliance. Going back to cars, let's say I was shopping for a car. I love the car. I love the price. I love the specs. But then I peek inside and I realize, hey, wait a minute. For some reason, this car doesn't have any seatbelts. I wouldn't buy the car, even if I loved everything else about it, because I would be afraid of getting hurt or dying if I drove it, right? But if car A has 5 seatbelts and car B has 100 seatbelts, I don't say car B is 20 times better than car A. Once you have 1 seatbelt per person, the need is fully met. And then the final category is delighters, right? And the delighter profile looks like this. If you don't have a delighter, it's fine because no one's expecting it to be there. It's kind of like a bonus feature, bonus thing. People aren't expecting it to be there, but by having a delighter or a wow feature, it can really create a lot of positive satisfaction. Couple examples I bring up. We're starting to stay in hotels again, but there's one hotel chain that when you check in, they give you chocolate chip cookies, right? And most people here would probably say it's DoubleTree. It just sticks in your mind. Those chocolate chip cookies are a delighter. They didn't have to do it. When you show up at Hilton and you go, hey, where are my chocolate chip cookies? I'm not staying here unless I get my cookies, right? It's a delighter, right? It's an easy delighter. A lot of times people think delighters have to be like this advanced AI that automatically predicts what you're going to want. It doesn't have to be that complicated thing. Another simple example, Spotify. Listen to Spotify the other day. Those of you that know me probably know I'm a Star Wars fan. I was listening to some Star Wars song, and on Spotify, they have a progress bar, right? And the progress bar, basically, when you listen to a Star Wars song, it turns into a lightsaber. I'm like, okay, it's just like that's kind of cool, right? And back to cars, I would say like GPS navigation was an example. When it first came out of a delighter. When it first came out, it was a delighter, right? Because it fundamentally changed how you got from point A to point B. But over time, more and more cars got GPS navigation. TomTom and Garmin came out with their add-on units, and now cars, now we all just use our phones. So this is not a static picture. Things can migrate over time so that yesterday's delighters become today's performance, tomorrow's must-have. So why am I telling you all this about the Kano model? All you need to take away is, hey, there are 3 categories, must-have, performance, delighters with this profile, and we're going to use that to get clear on our value prop, which is by creating a value prop grid or table. And I've shown it generically here, but basically for your product category, right, for your market that you're going after, you list 1 per row. What are the must-have benefits? What are the performance benefits? What are the delighter benefits, right? And then the next thing you do is you create columns for each of your key competitors. In this case, I've shown 2, A and B, and then a column for your product. The next thing you want to do is score how good a job does each competitor do on each of these benefits, right? And honestly, low, medium, high is usually good enough as long as the relative scores make sense. So this is saying both have the must-have. Competitor A is high, competitor B is high. Here, competitor, they're both medium and they have a delighter. And this is what you want to do this first. You do the competitive analysis first before you say, okay, now you look at this and you go, where can we win? How can we be what's our plan for being the best, right? We don't want to be like medium, medium, medium and not be better than anybody. And if we're going to try to take one of these rows for a high, do we have a plan for how we're going to be higher than A or higher than B if we're going to try to go for those, right? And this is where I like to bring up a Steve Jobs quote. Speaking of Steve Jobs, about focus, where he says people think focus means saying yes to the thing you got to focus on. That's not what it means at all. It means saying no to the 100 other good ideas there are. Innovation is saying no to 1,000 things. And I like to paraphrase it. My favorite definition of strategy is it means saying no to something. If you're just saying yes to everything, you're not being strategic. And so given this backdrop, we might go with something like this, where we're going to have the must-have. We're going to be medium here. We're going to say no to this one. And we're going to try to be the best in performance benefit 3, right? Maybe we've identified a segment that really values this, that this is a big opportunity. Or maybe we have some good solution-based ideas, how we can deliver higher satisfaction than these folks, and we have an idea for our delight or benefit. So the whole point of this exercise is to identify what's called your unique differentiators, which are which performance benefit are you going to be the best at? And honestly, it's just one. It's very, very lucky if you have more than one, right? And any unique delighter that you have. So that's a quick overview of Kano model and value prop grid, but that's how I like to do it. So you're really clear on how we're going to be better than the competition.
I love this. I love the separation of the performance, must-haves, and delighters. Based on this framework, Dan, what would you say, which one of this should be put into an MVP? Like, what is the goal of an MVP?
Yeah.
What do you do to make it a winning MVP?
That's a good call. And so a couple things, one mistake I see teams make and is their MVP only has the must-haves. Okay. Like, and I see, and usually it's because of time pressure. It's like, gosh, yeah, I know it'd be great if we could work in some performance stuff, but we got to hit that October, October 1st date. And so let's just launch it with the must-haves and then we'll iterate from there. Well, if you go back to this chart, if all you have is must-haves, then you have nothing in the top half. You have nothing that is actually making people happy. Hey, but we have HIPAA and we have 256-bit encryption and you can log in and log out and you can do forgot password. Aren't you impressed by that? No, I'm not impressed by that. You haven't done anything to create positive value, right? So that's the thing. And, so it's a good segue because the whole reason we want to get clear on our unique value prop here, like what are unique differentiators? When we go to the next step, which is MVP, Shivi, as you said, our MVP better have something in what's our special sauce. If our MVP doesn't have something about performance benefit 3, then what the heck are we testing in our MVP, right? The MVP is a test of your value prop. So our MVP needs to have the must-haves, and it needs to have at least our top idea for performance benefit 3 and our top idea for delight or benefit 2. Like that's the whole point, right? And so when we go down that, path, basically, let me pull up the next one. When you go down that path, then, this is an exciting time. First off, this is where you basically go from your benefits to your features. This is where once you're clear on your value prop, now it's fine to brainstorm benefit ideas. So the message on solution space is not, hey, never do solution space, never think about it. No, it's just make sure you're clear on the problem before you brainstorm the features. And so what you can do is for each of your benefits, and here I have some examples of like feeling safe or saving money, basically this is actually from an Airbnb example that I give, is then you can brainstorm all the different feature ideas that correspond to that benefit. And that's what you want to have is that tight mapping between the two. And then you're going to prioritize these ideas really quick on ROI. I'm not going to get into it. Everybody kind of knows ROI. You want to take these ideas. So we haven't talked about the engineering effort yet. Some of you may be like, hey, well, when do we take into account the scope? Yeah, we want to take into account the scope now before we prioritize things. But that importance and satisfaction I view as a preliminary prioritization step that product managers should do before we even waste engineering's time on estimating stuff, right? And so then you end up doing something like this. You take your value prop benefits, right, as swim lanes or rows in your roadmap, and then you deploy the different features over time. And you have those tough debates about what really needs to be in scope for V1 of this feature or product and what can wait. And that really is the essence of the MVP discussion is what absolutely needs to be in this milestone, right? And what can wait. And so when you're building a V1 product, people get the idea of MVP, but it's really a mindset. If you're like, hey, we have our quarter release coming up. Well, guess what? You still have to answer the question, what absolutely needs to be in the quarterly release and what can wait? Even when you do a sprint planning, what stories absolutely need to be in the sprint and which ones can wait? So it's not like a V1 product mindset, right? And so this is where what I'm trying to say is, yeah, for our MVP, we need to have the must-haves. Otherwise, people are going to not say this doesn't meet my needs. And our special sauce, our value prop was performance benefit 3 and delight and benefit 2. So we should at least have like ideally the highest priority, biggest impact thing we think in there, right? And so this would be like a minimalist MVP. And then we have a plan for how we're going to achieve the rest of our value prop over time, right? This is the idea. And so I call this a candidate because we haven't yet confirmed with, customers that they'd say, yeah, it's viable. Like the customer gets to decide, is it viable or not? And one of the top mistakes I see teams make, well, one is they don't get clear on their value props and they're not clear that their special sauce stuff is in there, right? The other, they launch it with must-haves only because of time pressure, right? The other biggest mistake I see is they overscope their MVP, which is ironic because the whole point of MVP is to not overscope whatever release you're planning. And the way it usually goes is something like this. Say there's some brave product team that proposes this kind of minimalistic MVP, and they feel like they've got enough research and evidence to support it. Hey, I know and people are debating, should we really, gosh, is it okay to not have P1A in the MVP or not, right? What usually happens is some stakeholder comes by, sees this and goes, wait a minute, you're not going to have feature P1A in the MVP? Oh my gosh, I think it's going to be horrible. They're going to laugh at us. Big client X is going to throw a hissy fit. Oh, usually it's a lot of hand waving and noise and not much evidence or data. And so now the poor product team has to decide, okay, do we succumb to the pressure and put this in, or do we not, right? And usually if it's some big stakeholder, they're just going to put it in. And what just happened? Nobody talked about it, but there's this thing called the iron triangle of software. You just added, by adding scope, you just delayed your MVP. Maybe by 3 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, who knows? But no one talks about that at that point in time, right? And that if it ended there, that'd be fine. But then what happens is then some other stakeholder goes, wait a minute, you're going to have P3B in there? I can't believe it. And next thing you know, you're pulling all these features in, and it's just like, it's not an MVP anymore. It's just a P. It's like, okay, well, now it's just kind of waterfall. It's over. And it comes from a place, it comes from a kind of a good intent, which is, I'm not really sure if that's enough functionality. It's kind of like throwing spaghetti at the wall. If we throw more spaghetti at the wall, more of it, we have a better chance something's going to stick. So that's kind of the thing. Whereas the counterpoint is, no, we have done our research. We have a case. We have a reason why we think this is adequate, right? As opposed to the spaghetti against the wall approach.
I love this, clarifying all the mistakes and, what would define a winning MVP. Dan, we're almost coming up on time. I like to maybe wrap it up with one more question around a lot of this idea that we touch upon is about identifying customer needs, getting the MVP, finding the value prop. What if I'm a product manager working on an existing, pretty mature product that we're constantly looking for ways to optimize? How would this framework apply to those people?
You can totally retroactively apply it. If you're like, that, because when you join a company as a PM, the product's been there for a while, right? So you're like, and so you can ask questions like, hey, does anybody written down, who our target customer is? Do we have any personas or segmentation? Unfortunately, you'd be surprised how often the answer is no. And so then what you're doing is you're kind of then trying to kind of not like reverse engineer or cobble it together. Okay, well, who do we think it is, right? So you're kind of starting to try to build that foundation if it's not there, just to kind of get people aligned. Because if we go back to this, when people are arguing about what features to build, it's because they are not aligned on the steps below that. They're not aligned, well, who's it for? If you think we're building for customer X and I think we're building for customer Y, of course, we're not going to agree on which feature is more important if we're not aligned on what customer problem they're doing, right? So as a PM, you can kind of, gently just kind of work on this and form these. And the thing about my frameworks, they're meant to be lightweight. You can see they're all these they're all one pagers, and they're meant to be lightweight, right? So I'm just going to switch to answer your specific question. There's one other thing on importance and satisfaction that I want to share, which is, let me go back to the other one, day one. Here we go. Cool. Which is, you can apply this to a real product. So here's an example of, I had a product that had been around for years that I inherited as the PM. And we were trying to figure out, okay, for the next version, which features should we improve? Because they had a pretty robust feature set. So we were going to add a couple new features, but it's like, are there any features we need to work on and make better? And so this is it's importance versus satisfaction, but now instead of high, medium, low, it's actual numbers. So this is an example of how you can do it very formally. If you want, you can do a survey where you ask people with number scales and you calculate numbers. And we did this with thousands of users, so we could do that. And we had 13 key features, and we asked people, first off, we said, hey, do you use this feature or not? Have you used it in the last 3 months? If they hadn't used it, they weren't allowed to score it, right? So we made sure the people that scored it were relevant. And we said, how important is this feature? And how satisfied are you with it, right? So it's the same kind of data. The first thing I saw as the PM was this feature up here. People were telling us 100% importance, 98% satisfaction. I'm like, that's awesome. And there's a cloud of features here, and there's this one here. But this was the one that was closest to that corner in the heat map. This was the one that had the highest temperature, pretty high importance, pretty low satisfaction. So we use this as a framework to say, okay, this is the feature we're going to go. Now we're going to go do discovery, figure out what's wrong with this feature. Why don't people like it? Let's redesign it and launch a new version of that feature. So that's an example of how you could do it. You can also just do it qualitatively, right? This is an example of what I mean. You put your sticky notes on there, then you just draw a line, or you put the heat map behind it like this, and then you can just say, okay, we think we need to be doing a better job on this problem based on what customers are telling. We're not doing a good enough job. Satisfaction is too low, right? Let's say like save time. We might want to try to increase the satisfaction and move that to the right, for example, right? Save money. Satisfaction is pretty high. So maybe we go, that's the lowest one. So we would prioritize it. We would use this to prioritize which problems do we need to do a better job in our existing product.
I love both the qualitative and the quantitative way of defining which problem to solve.
Right.
I think your presentation, Dan, again, you have such a wealth of knowledge about product and able to build them into frameworks. I think it really resonates with a lot of the LinkedIn members. Priyanka loves the Kennel model. Stacy says, great insight. Thank you so much. Love a lot of your slides. Great presentation, differentiating problem and solution space. Always a fan of your book. So Dan, I'd like to maybe conclude today's chat with a lightning round of questions that we always ask every guest.
Okay.
So are you up for the challenge?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I'm happy to stick around and answer any audience questions if people want. And if some people got to go, that's cool. But yeah, sure.
Cool. So first question, what is your favorite product currently and why?
I have a lot of good products I like to. So my MacBook Pro, I'm very happy with. My AirPods Pro, I'm very happy with. They just announced number 2. I'm just going to buy them because I just love what they do. The one probably that I like the most probably right now is a Whoop. So a Whoop is a fitness tracker, right? It's like an Apple Watch or it's like a Fitbit, but they made some really good product decisions. There's no UI, there's no screen. And as a result, it's lighter and the battery life is great, right? And, mainly just tracks your heart rate and your sleep. That's how I use it. You keep it on most of the time. It's comfortable. It's not that big. And then they were also smart in how you charge it. So you don't have to take it off like an Oura Ring or an Apple Watch. You have to take off. This, they have a little charger you slide on top of it. So anyway, it helps me manage my workouts and my sleep. And it's just, I can tell the thought that with these great design decisions that went into this product. So it's kind of my latest example that I like a lot.
That's awesome. You're a great salesperson. Now I want to try out that.
Yeah. Well, the other thing on the business side, they were smart. They did it as a SaaS subscription. So like Fitbit and all those guys, V1s, like you buy it, you pay $50 or $100 and then no more revenue stream, even though you keep using it. So these guys were smart. They made a SaaS subscription out of it too.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So second question, who would you say were the most influential product leader in your career?
Yeah. Well, and I would say leaders, there's 2 probably. One, it's funny because I never actually met the person. And it's a guy named Admiral Hyman Rickover. So when the first job I had out of college was working in this organization that I mentioned, it's kind of NASA for submarines. It's called Naval Reactors. And the person who started it, he's kind of like a Steve Jobs figure that people don't know about. So in the 50s, when nuclear power came out, he was like, you know what? We should put this on submarines so that they don't have to like constantly refuel and surface to charge their batteries. So from a tactical, it made a lot of sense. But it's funny because it reminds me of the Apple commercial. Here's to the crazy ones. Like who would in the 50s went out and would have the crazy idea? And the idea is one thing, but then he, through sheer force of will, built this whole nuclear submarine industry on his own, right? Now, the reason I know that is because I went to work in that organization and it was like, it had tons of his legacy around the processes, the way of thinking, the philosophies, which also is a deep foundation to a lot of stuff that I'm sharing here with you all. So anyway, and I'm just reading a new biography about him, and he's a very good entrepreneur, technical person who just did this amazing, incredible thing, right? And then the other one I would say is like my GM at Intuit. I won't share his name for his privacy, but he was just such a good GM. He just showed me like what is it like to really manage product and marketing and take care of your people. We'd have these awesome fun events and do growth and development and one-on-one and things like that. So those are the 2 leaders that impacted me a lot.
It's always helpful to have a great manager and role model to be aspired to. All right. One final question. What is one final piece of advice or resource you like to share with the community? I know you have some upcoming events, so I will bring them up.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. So Shivi just chatted in there. I mean, the first, if you haven't read my book, I recommend my book. We kind of did a really, I know it was super fast for y'all trying to get in here in time, get as many ideas in. You can check out my book. You can also check out my talks. If you go to dan-olsen.com, I've got all these talks. So like the book is the book, and then the talks like the movie version. They're all available for free on my website. And then just like this is an awesome community, I have a community of over 11,000 members called Lean Product Meetup that I created over 8.5 years ago. And each month I bring in a top speaker like you do, a top product speaker, and we get to hear from them and learn from them. So those are some. And then for anybody that happens to be in the Denver area, I was telling Shivi, I'm super excited to be doing an in-person, now that COVID's dying down, an in-person workshop in Denver. I'm going to be out there for Denver Startup Week on September 21st. And so the link's in chat if that happens to work out. So those are some things. And there's just a lot of great communities out there like Mind the Product Collective that have newsletters. You can go and subscribe to their newsletters. And there's so many podcasts. There's so many more product podcasts these days than there used to be, right? So there's a lot of information out there for new PMs.
Yeah, that's awesome. Any new books in the pipeline, Dan?
Not officially right now. I recently gave a new talk. So it's funny because a lot of the examples that are out there are consumer or B2C. And so I would always get feedback from enterprise people. Yeah, but what about us? Where's our example? So in May, I gave a new talk focused on enterprise PM and the unique challenges to that. So that's been pretty well received. So if you haven't seen that talk, you can check that talk out. That's the latest thing that I've done. And also in that talk is some new MVP thinking, because MVP is like the one thing that has the hottest debates, right? The most disagreements on product teams is probably the MVP concept. So I have some ideas in that talk that hopefully will help clarify it for people.
That sounds like a great talk. Would love to share maybe in the newsletter as part of the recap of this event.
Sure.
So thank you so much, Dan. I like to conclude it by sharing one feedback from our community. Yuri said, great talk, the best 45-minute investment made in the week. So thank you so much, Dan, for sharing.
Thanks, Yuri. Yeah, and I'm happy to connect with folks. Just leave me a little note, say, hey, I went to your talk, because I get lots of invites, and if I don't know who the person is, I'm not going to do it. But if you just say, hey, I was at your talk, then happy to connect with y'all.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. And
thanks
thank you to the community for joining us today. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.